All right, everybody. Welcome back. Thank you for being punctual. This alliance has been particularly punctual, as many of you have noted, anyway, so let's move to panel 2. Let's dive deeper into what the solutions look like. So we designed this panel to talk about what we call the systems and structure, the key state architecture to effectively combat trafficking. Let me give you a couple of words of introduction. 23 years ago, in its first Ministerial Council decision on enhancing the OSCE's effort to combat trafficking in human beings, OSCE governments recognized, and I'm quoting, the primary responsibility of participating states in combating trafficking based on integrated and coordinated approach. The following OSCE commitments and recommendations elaborated on the modalities to implement such approach, referring, among others, to the need for national strategies in order to unite efforts directed towards combating trafficking, as well as the need to enhance coordination by elaborating on measures such as appointing interministerial bodies and national coordinators. This was Porto, 2002. These provisions were then reiterated in the OSCE action plan to combat trafficking in human beings that was mentioned multiple times earlier yesterday. So later on, OSCE commitments also encourage OSCE participating states to consider appointing national rapporteurs or other mechanism for monitoring the anti-trafficking activities of state institutions and the implementation of national legislation requirements, thus outlining the main pillars of the anti-trafficking architecture, which we will be discussing today. These 4 pillars, national strategies, national coordinator, national rapporteur, and multi-agency task force, are designed to bring complementarity and ensure the national anti-trafficking institutional framework are comprehensive, are inclusive, transparent, and efficient, including in responding to the challenges discussed in panel 1 here yesterday. Back in 2002 in Porto, again, the OSCE participating states also committed to render assistance and protection to victims of trafficking, and to this end, when appropriate, to establish effective and inclusive national referral mechanisms, a provision that was further elaborated on in the OSCE action plan. The practices in the OSCE participating states in implementing this key architecture vary. The panel today features very prominent leaders in combating trafficking in human beings in their countries who will reflect upon the key building blocks of this effective architecture. So the first speaker on this panel today is Ms. Venla Roth, National Anti-Trafficking Coordinator of Finland. She has served as a national coordinator since 2020. She has more than 20 years of experience in the field of anti-trafficking, violence against women, human rights law, both nationally and internationally. She will elaborate on the prerequisites to effectively coordinate the anti-trafficking efforts and the role of national anti-trafficking coordinators in advancing the development and implementation of the national agenda against trafficking. Dr. Roth, it's a pleasure to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Andrea. It's a great pleasure to be here today. It's an honor. Thank you, Val, and your office for inviting me here to speak to you. Distinguished Excellencies, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to talk about how Finland has sought to intensify its works against human trafficking. And, you know, it's a bit tricky spot, to be honest, after that first panel today. But I'm going to talk about hope. I have worked 20 years in the field, in different positions, both in theory and practice, in order to restore human dignity of the most vulnerable in our society. I myself too feel frustrated, sad, and tired sometimes because of the slow progress of the work. But this time here, I decided to speak about what can be done, what have been done, what has actually been done in Finland. And I'm going to talk about, with the optimistic tone today. This was a conscious decision of mine when I prepared for this conference. In 2019, when the previous government was formed in Finland, it was decided that the work against human trafficking is one of the government's key priorities. In addition to broader policy objectives, the government program included a number of concrete measures to enhance the work against human trafficking and improve the position of victims. The government formation negotiations were supported by the recommendations of an independent national rapporteur on human trafficking, who has been operating in Finland for more than 10 years already. The negotiations were also influenced by the extensive media attention, which raised serious problems in how human trafficking had been tackled in Finland and how victims of human trafficking have been met. The government decided to establish a permanent position of a government anti-trafficking coordinator. And the coordinator, that's me, was given a task of, among other things, preparing an action plan against human trafficking, an ambitious one. The aim was to cross the boundaries of administrative branches so that the work would have more impact. The planning of the action plan did not have to start from scratch. We have been conducting high quality research for years, which provided concrete tools for defining the necessary measures against human trafficking. Moreover, expertise has been accumulated for more than 15 years. For example, in the assistance system for victims of human trafficking, which is a specialized service system for victims and which acts also as a national center of expertise in Finland. What I would like to say is that the political will is a necessary ingredient, and Finland is a prime example of this. Both the government program and the action plan contained a large number of ambitious, concrete measures, which were also allocated financial resources and other funding. In the long term, the aim is to support cooperation between authorities in practice and to encourage the construction of cross-sectoral networks based on functional models, cooperation agreements, and structures instead of merely personal relations. One of the examples is the preparation of the national referral mechanism for Finland, and the other one is a specialized project which seeks to improve cooperation between the social and healthcare sector workers, NGOs, and the assistance system to detect and identify sexual exploitation better in Finland, because this is a really serious challenge for us. The government decided to put anti-trafficking work high on the political agenda because it saw human trafficking not only as a serious violation of human rights, but also as a form of economic crime that threatened society as a whole. The government program reflected the government's strong view that crime victims are in a vulnerable position, especially victims of human trafficking. The idea was that we need special measures in order to ensure that victims of human trafficking would have the courage to report a crime and seek help from the authorities, for example, without fear of immediate removal from the country. The government program gave particular emphasis on ensuring that criminal liability for human trafficking offenses would be enforced. The government decided to set up a new nationwide police unit to uncover and investigate human trafficking in a specialized way. Earmarked funding was allocated to this. It was centrally understood in Finland that trafficking in human beings distorts fair competition, weakens tax revenue, and threatens the internal security of us all. If trafficking in human beings is allowed to increase, it is not only the victims and their families who will suffer, but society as a whole. The aim of the action plan was to implement the vision of the government. A wide range of authorities, CSOs, and parishes around Finland were involved in the work. Workshops and consultations were held, as well as experiences and views were gathered from the practitioners and survivors of human trafficking. Finally, we met together with responsible working group, defined common goals, and prepared proposals for the necessary measures to address the challenges raised in the most effective and victim-centered way. This was followed by an assessment of the need for additional funding and the identification of those responsible for the implementation of each measure. Finally, the timetable for the implementation was assessed. This is not enough, however. It is very important to follow, like on a steady way, like a, really continuously, how the implementation is going on. So we actually follow that implementation in a bilateral meetings together with all those responsible parties of each and single measure that we have agreed upon. I support them to do that. It now appears that almost all of the agreed measures will be implemented fully and on time. That's great. I would like to highlight some concrete achievements of our work. Firstly, the help provided through the specialized assistance system is no longer dependent on the progress of the criminal proceedings related to human trafficking. The amendments will promote both the status of the victim and, this is what we see and how we see this, the interests of society as a whole. By improving the detection of human trafficking and referral of victims to assistance, the enforcement of criminal liability can be strengthened. The authorities will, though, know more often about the crime. We cannot tackle this offense if we don't even know about it. This is especially important for sexually exploited trafficking victims who are often most afraid of both the perpetrators and the authorities. Secondly, the government amended the Aliens Act to prevent exploitation of foreign labor and to improve the status of victims. As a result, if there are reasonable grounds to suspect that the foreigner who holds a residence permit in Finland has been exploited at work, they will not lose their right to reside in Finland. In such a case, they may in fact continue to work for a new employer or for the purpose of applying for a new residence permit, The aim is to improve the detection and identification of labor exploitation and trafficking. This is a hidden crime, and we need to reveal it. Thirdly, the action plan includes a number of measures to increase the know-how of the authorities in order to identify trafficking in human beings and to address grievances. Through the action plan, training is provided, for example, to Labour Inspectorate, probation authorities, prosecutors, judges, lawyers. Moreover, research has been conducted so that the decision makers would get information on what works and what doesn't. Fourthly, the mandate of the Labour Inspectorate to intervene in human trafficking has been strengthened, and their resources to carry out surveillance at work sites has been increased and strengthened. We have involved new actors in the fight against human trafficking, youth work, civil aviation authorities, as well as integration and employment authorities who actually meet victims of human trafficking in their daily work. The know-how of employers and labor market organizations has also been increased, and the safe re-employment of victims of human trafficking has been supported. We see victims of human trafficking as a really important people, that they need work and we need them. Also, they have skills and we can use that, in the working life. At the same time, new cooperation networks between authorities and NGOs have been built to improve the identification of particularly vulnerable victims and their referral to services. As a result, what we see, the number of identified victims of human trafficking is increasing. More and more victims seek help and report the crime, and more often criminal liability is enforced and proceeds of crime confiscated to the state. The ultimate goal, of course, is to make Finland safe and fair for all. If you allow a few words about the future, the work is far from complete. New challenges bring new needs for joint activities. Finland is in a situation where the population is aging. There is a need to increase the number of foreign labor in cleaning sector, restaurants, hospitality, healthcare sector. In the future, work against human trafficking is likely to become increasingly important. And in order to be effective, the objectives of the work will have to be increasingly integrated into the measures to promote work-based immigration to Finland. Central to the future of Finland as a whole is how well we succeed in preventive exploitation and inequality that's important in this change. It is clear for us that exploiting other people must not pay off. It will be prevented, for example, by supporting integration of everybody, also those who come to work in Finland, newcomers' language skills, responsible and sustainable international recruitment. We need to do a lot in order to fight against human trafficking. We are not ready yet, but we are on a good track. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roth, for your presentation and for highlighting the need for political will, for proper resources to conduct the work, outlining the value of a strategy, the National Action Plan. Only two-thirds of OSCE participating states have a National Action Plan at the moment. And that's something worth considering, as we just heard from our first speaker. Finally, allow me to highlight a couple of elements in her presentation which really struck, and I wish we can all take with us: the assistance to victims being decoupled from criminal proceedings, the efforts around the prevention of exploitation of foreign labor, as well as the strengthening of the mandate of Labor Inspectorate. With that, I pass to my next speaker, Ambassador Cindy Dyer, Ambassador at Large to monitor and combat trafficking in person in the US. Ambassador Dyer leads the Department of State's Office to monitor and combat trafficking in persons. She is a human rights advocate, former prosecutor with 3 decades of experience working at the local, national, and international level to prevent and respond to human trafficking, sexual assault, and domestic violence. For 12 years, she was the Vice President for Human Rights at Vital Voices Global Partnership, an international NGO advancing women leadership. Prior to joining Vital Voices, she served in a presidential appointment as the Director of the Office on Violence Against Women within the US Department of Justice. Ambassador Dyer will reflect on multi-layer coordination mechanisms existing in the US at national and local level, aimed at strengthening the government's effort to prevent and fight human trafficking and to protect the victims, as well as investment. We heard the investment point just earlier. It cannot be stressed enough. Ambassador, it's wonderful to have you here with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you for the warm welcome, and special thanks to Val Ritchie and for his office for convening this event and inviting me to speak on this panel today. Throughout the course of my career, I have worked to prevent and respond to human trafficking and gender-based violence issues. I first became aware of the issue of human trafficking in the mid-1990s. I'm a little long in the tooth, when I was serving as a specialized domestic and sexual violence prosecutor in Dallas, Texas, and volunteering at a local women's shelter. Fast forward to today, where I am honored to serve as the Ambassador at Large to combat and monitor trafficking in persons for the United States State Department. Settling into my new role, I have been eager to explore how I can apply my experiences from state and local levels and from leading a global NGO focused on women's leadership to the U.S. government's efforts to combat human trafficking. I am delighted to reflect on systems and structures, including coordinating mechanisms and survivor engagement, that are strengthening the U.S. government's efforts to prevent human trafficking, prosecute traffickers, and protect victims. In the United States, the National Coordinating Authority is complemented by numerous local-level anti-trafficking task forces. Both national and local-level coordination are critical to comprehensively addressing human trafficking. The U.S. government's national coordinating body is the President's Interagency Task Force to monitor and combat trafficking in persons. Established by the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, the task force's membership has grown from 5 departments and agencies up to 20 today. This growth reflects the need for a comprehensive multidisciplinary approach to combat this crime. Task force agencies collaborate to advance our National Action Plan, which is organized around the foundations of U.S. and global anti-trafficking efforts: prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnerships. Agencies regularly gather to advance policies and promote action. This past February, the Biden administration held its 2nd task force meeting, and the first I have had the opportunity to participate in, where each agency made substantive action commitments for the coming year. One of the most meaningful moments for me so far as ambassador was hearing from Brenda Myers-Powell, a member of the U.S. Advisory Council on Human Trafficking, at this year's task force meeting. The Advisory Council, which was established in 2015, comprises survivor leaders who advise and make recommendations on federal anti-trafficking policies. Mrs. Myers-Powell presented on the Council's 6th report, which was released in September and is available publicly online, and I encourage you to look at it. The report focuses on topics that draw from council members' personal and professional experiences, including understanding the root causes of human trafficking, child exploitation, and online threats, and demand reduction. Importantly, the U.S. Congress passed legislation in 2021 that gave the Department of State authority to compensate council members for their work. And in 2022, other legislation made this advisory council a permanent body. These actions set a high standard for our federal government on incorporating survivors' expertise that I routinely cite in bilateral engagements around the world. In addition to the president's interagency task force, the U.S. also relies on strong state and local multidisciplinary task forces that also meet regularly at the local level to share best practices, promote holistic approaches, and coordinate directly on detecting, investigating, and prosecuting human trafficking crimes and supporting survivors. One example of these local task forces is the Enhanced Collaborative Model Human Trafficking Program, which is an initiative funded by the U.S. Department of Justice. Approximately 50 of these local task forces operate across the United States to identify victims of human trafficking in local communities, ensure survivors have access to services, and bring traffickers to justice. This is a collaborative approach, including victim service providers, law enforcement and prosecution personnel, survivors, and other governmental and non-governmental partners. When my hometown of Dallas, Texas, created its first human trafficking task force in 2001, I actually served as a representative from the local prosecutor's office. Working closely with representatives from local law enforcement, service providers, healthcare clinics, and public school officials increased my ability as a prosecutor to seek justice for victims and create a more seamless continuum of care for survivors. I want to take a moment to highlight some progress that has resulted from these various coordination models. First, with more departments and agencies than ever now participating in our national task force, the United States is making efforts to raise awareness and integrate effective anti-trafficking measures into nearly all major areas of government. The fact that the task forces meet consistently and with high-level representation, and that we broadcast these meetings publicly, enhances coordination and creates a strong incentive for agencies to participate and report on concrete and new actions. Second, through these mechanisms, the U.S. government is deepening political will and resources to incorporate victim-centered, trauma-informed, and culturally responsive approaches. Excuse me. Over my career, I have actually traveled to more than 20 countries to train law enforcement, prosecutors, and judges on the importance of adopting these types of approaches to combating human trafficking. I am super encouraged to see them taking root around the world, and especially within my home country. Finally, the National Task Force has been instrumental in encouraging agencies to adopt the United States Federal Acquisition Regulation for combating trafficking in persons, which is a landmark regulation that prohibits human trafficking and related conduct such as passport retention and worker-paid recruitment fees in government contracting supply chains. As far as we know, the U.S. government is the world's largest single purchaser of goods and services. Federal contractors and subcontractors are on notice of significant consequences if they are found to be engaging in trafficking-related activities or disregarding human trafficking in their supply chains. Of course, along with progress comes persistent challenges. The U.S. government at all levels must do more to avoid inappropriately penalizing victims for the acts that they committed as a direct result of being trafficked. This principle can be difficult to implement when victims are not identified as victims because the means used to coerce their compliance are invisible, while the evidence of their unlawful acts is more immediately apparent. Another challenge for the National Task Force, and indeed for all U.S. anti-trafficking stakeholders, is that consensus building and coordination across the many federal, state, local, tribal, territorial, and non-governmental entities that all play a critical role in the response to human trafficking is complicated and time-consuming. For maximum impact, the United States Advisory Council of Survivors must build relationships with all 20 of the task forces and agencies to formulate actionable recommendations specific to each agency's roles, responsibilities, and authorities. For governments who are contemplating a similar national task force and corresponding advisory council of survivors, I recommend regular and transparent task force operating procedures at both technical and leadership levels, support systems for council members to maximize their impact of their tenures, firewalls to promote council members' independence, and providing council members sufficiently long tenures to facilitate a meaningful contribution. Now I'll touch briefly on national referral mechanisms and victim services. Consistent with the OSCE's handbook on NRMs, I believe that when properly designed and implemented, NRMs can effectively identify victims and facilitate comprehensive protection, proactively identifying and assisting trafficking victims, providing access to justice and redress, and facilitating individualized, victim-centered, trauma-informed, and culturally responsive services, as well as social inclusion. I would further argue that NRMs can also promote longer-term care to facilitate trafficking victims' mental, physical, financial, and social recovery. Yet to be effective, NRMs must not delay or serve as a barrier to victims receiving comprehensive services. Rather, they should be truly multidisciplinary, including by empowering first responders and civil society service providers to identify and refer victims, and by incorporating the recommendations of trafficking victims and survivors. In the United States, we have mechanisms at both the national and local levels that function similar to NRMs by referring victims quickly to services, such as the local task forces that I mentioned earlier. Another example is our National Human Trafficking Hotline, which in 2022 received over 55,000 substantial messages, including calls, texts, chats, online tips, and emails. The hotline identified and provided referrals in more than 10,000 reports of potential human trafficking situations involving more than 16,000 potential victims. Several federal agencies also administer grants designed to support ongoing assistance and services for both U.S. and foreign trafficking victims across the United States. The Department of Justice and the Department of Health and Human Services are the primary agencies for this purpose. Those two together have provided approximately $100 million on average in new funding each year. They administer a wide range of programs with a view to enhance victims' access to comprehensive and specialized services, including case management and referrals, direct services, housing, legal assistance, and mental health services. In closing, I want to encourage others to consider implementing both national and local level coordinating bodies that meet consistently and commit to transparency in integrating diverse perspectives, including, most importantly, the expertise and recommendations of survivors. I also want to encourage others to pursue all available means to sufficiently resource specialized short and long-term services for all victims of trafficking. And finally, we want to give a special thank you and shout out to Val. We are so grateful for your leadership on these issues in the OSCE over the last 4 years and for all of your work through the Interagency Coordination Group Against Trafficking in Persons. You have truly helped advance the anti-trafficking work of the OSCE in the region and beyond. We wish you all the best in your new role and hope to also have the opportunity to collaborate with you on anti-trafficking in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ambassador, particularly for outlining this multi-layered and multidisciplinary coordination mechanism. Here at the OSCE, we like to talk about the from policy to practice approach, and this seems like the perfect implementation of that approach. But thank you also for outlining not only the issue of survivor engagement, but how this has been done permanently and how this is a consistent and permanent section in your anti-trafficking work. Finally, coming from a prosecutor, a delineation of the challenges around the non-punishment principle, I thought were very insightful. So thank you so much for your remarks. With that, so after discussing the key coordinating bodies, let's move now to the other side of the coin, so the rapporteur side. The next speaker is Ulan Nogoibaev. He was appointed National Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons in September last year in the Kyrgyz Republic. Currently, he's the head of the expert working group on human trafficking established under the Speaker of the Parliament in Kyrgyzstan. Mr. Nogoibaev, thank you so much for coming here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Kyrgyz Republic and the Office of Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons, I'm very pleased to address the 23rd Alliance Conference Against Trafficking in Persons here in Vienna at Hofburg. Key stakeholders, decision makers, and experts gathered today in Vienna, and hundreds joined us online to discuss the role of national leadership to end the human trafficking. Dear colleagues, I'll try to be optimistic to continue the optimistic tone of my colleagues. And I think many of you will agree with me that we may all be going through the most difficult time for the OSCE participating states since the end of the World War II. And today, more than ever, partnership and cooperation are the key components of success in combating human trafficking. The 2030 Alliance Conference is a great opportunity for us to share experiences and success stories. It's about networking and communication between dedicated people and outstanding professionals. Let me share with you Kyrgyzstan's experience in preventing and combating human trafficking. We really have something to tell, and I would like to start with our legislation. Our legislation which contributes to ensuring a comprehensive approach to combating human trafficking in the Kyrgyz Republic. The Kyrgyz Republic, the legislation of the Kyrgyz Republic is one of the most advanced and complies with the most modern developed international standards. The Kyrgyz Republic has ratified almost all major international documents in the field of prevention of human trafficking, including related crimes. In addition, work is being done on an ongoing basis to improve legislation, both in terms of criminal prosecution of criminals and in the field of providing protection and effective assistance to victims of human trafficking. All this work is carried out in partnership with non-governmental and international organizations, providing a comprehensive approach to combating human trafficking. In recent years, the state bodies of the Kyrgyz Republic have taken quite significant steps in the field of formulating an anti-trafficking policy in all its approaches, preventing the problem, identifying and assisting victims of human trafficking, criminal prosecutions of crime in the field of human trafficking, as well as in terms of effective cooperation of all subjects of interaction from the governmental and non-governmental sector. It can be said with the confidence that the necessary regulatory framework has been adopted in Kyrgyzstan. The national legislation is based on the best practices of international norms. The government adopted a number of important legislative acts. Let me just give you some examples. Article 28 of the Constitution of the Kyrgyz Republic does not allow slavery and human trafficking. Kyrgyzstan ratified the protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in person, especially women and children, supplementing the United Nations Conventions against the transnational organized crime. In 2005, the relevant law of the Kyrgyz Republic on the prevention and combating of human trafficking was adopted. Since 2008, the programs of the government of the Kyrgyz Republic and action plans to combat human trafficking have been implemented. In 2017, a specialized unit for combating kidnapping and human trafficking was created in the main criminal investigation department of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Kyrgyz Republic. In 2019, the national referral mechanism was adopted. The Criminal Code of the Kyrgyz Republic provides relevant articles regulating the fight against the type of crime, and the number of legal acts have been adopted. For example, Articles 166 and 170 of the new Criminal Code criminalize human trafficking for the purpose of sexual and labor exploitation. Article 167 on trafficking in children was also added to Criminal Code, providing for imprisonment for a term from 5 to 8 years. In general, the state policy of the Kyrgyz Republic in the field of preventing and combating human trafficking provides for the unity of actions of state authorities, local governments, and non-governmental organizations to prevent and combat human trafficking. In recent years, a number of measures have been taken in the country to intensify the activities of authorized state bodies in the field of combating human trafficking, aimed at providing assistance of victims of human trafficking. The Cabinet of Ministers of Kyrgyz Republic is the main subject management of the activities to prevent the combat human trafficking and provided with necessary funds and resources. The Ministry of Labor, Social Security and Migration of the Kyrgyz Republic is the coordinating body of executive power, which performs the functions of developing and implementing the state policy in the field of migration, including issues of victims of human trafficking within the framework of legislation of the Kyrgyz Republic in the field of preventing and combating human trafficking. It coordinates the activities of the state bodies and other entities. The main goal of the task of the ministry is to develop and implement measures to prevent and combat human trafficking, as well as to protect victims of human trafficking. It is important to note that the ministry, jointly with the other state bodies and non-governmental organizations, is a part of inter-ministerial commission established under the National Referral Mechanism. The main task of the commission is to identify victims of human trafficking and address policy implementation issues, including the development and improvement of legal acts in this direction. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, promoting professional growth and professional development of personnel is one of the important components of the work of the stakeholders of the Kyrgyz Republic. On a regular basis, training events are held to increase the capacity of employees of state and law enforcement agencies. In 2022, the second national simulation exercise to combat human trafficking will held as a part of implementation of the norms of national referral mechanisms for victims of human trafficking, where more than 70 people took part, representing the General Prosecutor's Office, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the Ministry of Labor, Labor Inspectorate, Migration Council, NGOs, and independent experts. It is also important to note that Kyrgyzstan has established effective interaction between government agencies and non-governmental organizations in the fight against human trafficking. Both sides play an important role in countering this crime and helping the victims. State bodies such as Ministry of Interior and Ministry of Labor and the Prosecutor's Office and others are responsible for law enforcement and prevention of human trafficking. They investigate, arrest, and prosecute traffickers, assist victims, and monitor and control the human trafficking situation in the country. Non-governmental organizations such as independent public organizations, international and national NGOs are also actively involved in the fight against the human trafficking in Kyrgyzstan. They provide active assistance to victims of human trafficking, provide legal, medical, and physical support, carry out preventative work, provide education and public information, and interact with government agencies and international organizations on combating human trafficking. Interaction between government agencies and NGOs is carried out at various levels, such as the development of and implementation of national strategies and action plans, coordination and cooperation in conducting operational activities, the exchange of information and experience, cooperation on working group sites, as well as participation in joint projects and initiatives. Dear colleagues, in order to ensure interaction between two main partners, the state and the NGOs, and to develop the effective coordination policy, the Council for Migration under the Speaker of the Kyrgyz Republic Parliament was created as a platform to exchange views in this field. The Migration Council is a relatively young institution that was established in December of 2020 and under the Speaker of the Parliament of the Kyrgyz Republic to strengthen and the interaction of compatriots abroad, international partners, diaspora organizations with the state executive bodies in the Kyrgyz Republic. The Council prepares recommendations and proposals on issues of migrations and supports protection of the rights and interests of compatriots abroad, as well as recommendations and proposals on illegal migration. Despite all these achievements, it should also be taken into account that the existing platform for discussing problems in most cases cannot link practical development with improvement of legal acts. And to achieve these goals in September of 2022, taking into account recommendations of OSCE in the field, in the structure of the Migration Council, and by the order of the Speaker of the Parliament, the Institute of Rapporteur on Trafficking in Person was established. The creation of this institute in the structure of the legislative body will ensure a balance and delimitation of the power of the stakeholders, the implementation of measures to combat human trafficking being carried out by executive branch. But monitoring and evaluation of this work should be carried out by independent body, in particular by the Parliament and the Office of Rapporteur. The role of Rapporteur's institution to promote the anti-trafficking agenda, identify and address gaps and problems, study trends in the field of human trafficking in the Kyrgyz Republic, and prepare annual alternative analytical report on the situation in the field of combating human trafficking at the national level. At the stage of establishment of the Office of the Rapporteur as an independent body, it was important for us to build a reliable partnership with our colleagues around the world. Again, with the support of donors, the first steps have taken, and we are building relationship with our partners abroad. And today's conference is also an important and significant platform for communications. Our representation at International Dialogue Platform makes it possible to launch joint initiatives. For example, today a project is being launched to organize additional specialized training for employees of law enforcement agencies in Kyrgyzstan on the topic of combating cybercrime. The specifics of using the new technologies in identifying victims of human trafficking, recruiters and exploiters. This initiative will also be implemented with the support of OSCE. The Rapporteur's Institute works closely with public representatives of the Council for Migration and Diaspora Organizations abroad. Dear colleagues, I would like to emphasize that the initiative of Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons just want to point out that the initiative was supported by the Speaker of the Parliament, and we really appreciate that. As a rapporteur on trafficking in persons, I'm convinced that this independent institution will be a useful tool for addressing existing problematic aspects and developing effective measures to combat human trafficking in the Kyrgyz Republic. And will also stimulate the exchange of the best practices with international partners. With this, dear colleagues, I would like to conclude my long speech by underlining our commitment to continue dialogue and cooperation in all OSCE operating platforms. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Nogoibaev, for outlining the whole spectrum, starting from a comprehensive law to then how this was strengthened through the different angles of prevention, protection, prosecution, and of course, partnership, and the path that led to the appointment of the National Anti-Trafficking Rapporteur, which is just a wonderful practice. And we're delighted to have you here and to let you share that. Our next speaker, Miss Conny Rijken, she's the National Rapporteur on Human Trafficking and Sexual Violence Against Children in the Netherlands. She will further elaborate on the role of the National Anti-Trafficking Rapporteur in moving forward the state's anti-trafficking response and on the importance of the independence of this function. Ms. Rijken has been on this role since September 2022. She's a professor of human trafficking and globalization at Tilburg University and an elected member of GRETA, the group of experts on action against trafficking in human beings of the Council of Europe. She spent the past 20 years working on various aspects of human trafficking, including labor exploitation, the role of companies in combating human trafficking, and the psychological consequences of human trafficking. Thank you so much for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and many thanks for the invitation to speak here today. I'm delighted to be back here in Vienna, actually, where I was also participating some years ago. I also would like to start with congratulating the OSCE with the 20th anniversary of the OSCE Action Plan to Combat Trafficking. I will start with a small anecdote, because 20 years ago, when the action plan, then called the mechanism, was established, it was under actually the Dutch presidency of the OSCE, and one of the key players to establish this action plan was actually our current ambassador here in Vienna, Mr. Christoph Kemp. So, and I think the action plan in and of itself is an example of a successful system and structure, but then on the European and international level. So I was invited to talk about what is happening in the Netherlands on the national level and the office of the National Rapporteur. So as was mentioned already, I am in the office since September last year, and the mandate of my mandate is human trafficking and sexual violence against children. So it's a double mandate that originally it started actually as a mandate on human trafficking alone, but that was later extended with child pornography, and then afterwards broadened up to sexual violence against children. Now, how is this established, and what do we do? And I will also address some of the conditions that are key for a successful establishment of an institute as the National Rapporteur. So I think we have here on the table maybe the newest rapporteur in our midst, and maybe also the oldest rapporteur, but as an institution, because it was established already in 2000 as an independent national rapporteur. And we talked about the figures yesterday a bit, and I just wanted to elaborate a bit on the estimations for the Netherlands, which is based on the multiple system estimates. I think it was addressed indirectly yesterday as well, but I think that is what we have currently the most reliable method of making estimations of victims. It was established by the UNODC, and also one of my predecessors was also involved in establishing that mechanism. And based on or with this methodology, it is now estimated that there are some 5,000 victims of human trafficking in the Netherlands. Well, we also heard about the figures yesterday, whether they are reliable or not, but this is actually the most reliable method we have for the estimation at the moment. Now, a few words about my mandate. Well, my mandate is we have a legal law on the National Rapporteur specifically, and I think that is one of the strength of the system that we have in the Netherlands. At the beginning, we did not have a law specifically addressing the mandate of the rapporteur, so that was a policy. So it was only since 2013 that we have this legal provision on, or this law on, the National Rapporteur. So the mandate is determined by law, and so what it says is that we are conducting research on the scope and the nature of human trafficking and sexual violence against children, that we conduct research on the effects of the policies to combat trafficking and sexual violence against children. We advise the government based on our research, and we do periodically reporting. And all our publications are public. So this is determined by law, and that gives a very, very strong basis. What is also in this law is that the term for the National Rapporteur is 4 years. So, and it can be extended with another term of 4 years. But that does also mean that there is a renewal of the position after maximum of 8 years. Also, the independence is in this specific law. And there is a provision in this law that the Ministry of Justice, that's the responsible ministry in the Netherlands, has to guarantee the conditions for me to execute this task. So there's an obligation to take care of the office. I also have a bureau of approximately now 18 persons, researchers, advisors, working on helping me, of course, with the mandate. It is also established in the law that the bureau, as we call it, is only accountable to me, so not to the government, but to me. So that means that we can set our own agenda. We are not involved in the execution of the policy. So there is a kind of a trias politica in in the National Rapporteur as well, where we then serve as, well, you could say that we represent the judicial power, but we are not involved in the execution, which would also, of course, be a bit odd if we then afterwards have to evaluate the effects of the policy. So we are not involved in the follow-up of our recommendations, although we can, of course, also facilitate the implementation of our recommendations in the cooperations. So we can set our own agenda, and so we have the agenda for the next 4 years, and these are the overall topics that we will focus on for the next 4 years. Also, given my background in victimology and in human rights, victim protection will be one of the key focal points. That means access to assistance, but also unconditional support. And we want to see whether we can take it a step further, not only unconditional support, but also access to residency and unconditional residency. And these are often linked together. But also, we need to understand the overlap of the victims and perpetrators. It was already addressed yesterday slightly, but that is a further aspect. Also, the understanding of the victims and the victim vulnerability. Another aspect is the vulnerable groups, such as minors, but also undocumented and those with mental disabilities. And a third focus point will be migration in relation to trafficking and sexual violence against children. So we will focus on what are the experiences of people when they are on the move. What happens actually when they are on the move, and how does that affect them when they enter in another country? How does that relate to human trafficking? But also, we know of a lot of the people who are disappearing from the facilities when they finally arrive. So migrants, but also unaccompanied minors who disappear. What happened to them? We know that a number of them end up in trafficking circles. So how does that work? But also recruitment, for instance, in asylum centers, which is nowadays a problem across a number of across the countries. So these are some of the overarching topics that we will address. And for the priorities for this year, so where we are currently working on is the monitor on sexual violence against children. We are conducting a research on offenders of human trafficking, where we also look into, okay, how do people become offenders? What is their trajectory? What is their history? How do they become traffickers? And the same for offenders for child sexual abuse material. And we have a specific research running on the detection and identification of victims of human trafficking, and also how that is organized. Where are the gaps? Where do we miss persons? Where are opportunities to actually increase the identification and to strengthen the identification? Then we have some cross-cutting issues that are also addressed yesterday. The digitalization is, of course, not only on human trafficking, how it is performed, but also digitalization and the possibilities that tech provides for law enforcement to combat human trafficking. The cooperation with stakeholders on different levels, on the national level, is crucial, of course. So it's important that we are anchored also in this landscape and the different levels, because as was human trafficking cannot be seen in isolation. So it is influenced by international connections, by the borders, by institutions on the international and as well as the European level. Now, bit about the independence, because I think it's really crucial that the national rapporteur is independent. So first of all, to set the own agenda, but also to be able to evaluate the policies. There it is important. And also to provide advice and provide recommendation on all levels, not only to the government, to the central government, but also to the local government, to other organizations, to NGOs, both within the country and abroad. And the national rapporteur, because of its independence, can also foster the cooperation between organizations, because the landscape of trafficking in many countries is quite dense, and there is some competition, there is some tension between organizations, and the national rapporteur, as an independent mechanism, can play a role there to foster that cooperation. Now, just to some final words on some good examples or some conditions actually for a national rapporteur to play this role. As was also stressed by Venla Roth earlier in this panel, the political commitment is key. That is always the case. But as we all know, political actors change. And then the political commitment can change as well. And therefore, such as a legal basis is actually very, very important, not to become part of these political changes. And so in the Netherlands, we have a strong legal basis nationally in the specific law, but of course also internationally within the European Union in the directive, the Trafficking Directive, as well as the Council of Europe Convention on Combating Trafficking in Human Beings. What is also crucial is that there is a guaranteed budget, so that you can determine where to prioritize, and that there's no restrictions and there's no conditions to this budget. So that is also a very important part. What is also important is that what is the follow-up of your reports? What is the follow-up of your recommendations? Because you can make recommendations, you can give advice, but what is the follow-up? So we have a gentleman's agreement in the Netherlands that there is always a parliamentary or a reaction from the government on our recommendations, which is also, of course, a basis to further the dialogue. Then what is crucial is the data position. So is there an obligation, for instance, to share data? Because if you want to monitor and you don't have, and there is no obligation for other parties to share with you the data, then they say, well, we are not allowed to share the data because of privacy regulations. So here again, it's important that there is also an obligation for all actors involved, so that you can actually do the monitoring work. And that is something that we still have to work on also in the Netherlands. And then, of course, it is crucial that you know the partners, that the partners know you, that you are a trusted partner, that you have an open form of communication also with the partner, even if the message is not what they actually had wished or what they had expected. So these are some, I think, good examples and conditions for all national rapporteurs for the implementation on the practical level. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rijken. The Dutch National Rapporteur has been universally recognized as a good practice, and many countries are using your example to when they consider setting up that specific mechanism. And thank you particularly for highlighting the independence element, which allows you to elaborate with a high degree of credibility and to support some of the other coordinating mechanisms that we heard earlier, so the multi-agency task force, the national coordinators, to then inform on what decisions and what policies to adopt. Speaking of systems and structures that should be in place to ensure comprehensive anti-trafficking response at the national level would not be complete without mentioning a particular mechanism dedicated to the protection of victims of trafficking, and that is the national referral mechanism. It's my pleasure to welcome Ms. Kateryna Ryabiko, First Deputy Director of the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, ODIHR, who will share the ODIHR's efforts to promote the establishment of national referral mechanisms as well as a tool to join efforts to protect the rights of trafficked persons. Ms. Kateryna Ryabiko served with the U.S. Agency for International Development, the Freedom House, the National Democratic Institute for International Affairs, and other public and private entities. Her work has been recognized by multiple awards, including for outstanding achievements in promoting democratic development and her leadership in guiding democracy assistance effort. With that, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I'll be completely honest with you. It's not easy to go last in this panel. And especially when we talk about the national referral mechanisms, as much has been said. And if you allow me to start with a couple of reflections and continue in the vein of the previous speakers with giving practical examples and the recommendations is related to the national referral mechanism. But since we talk about the architecture today, what is architecture is the building blocks. And there are a lot of examples of these building blocks mentioned from Finland, the Netherlands, the Kyrgyzstan, and our understanding of the inclusion of survivors is also a building block that Ambassador Dyer was talking about, referring to the example of the United States, but also our understanding of trauma, our understanding of the transformation of victims to survivors and later to survivor victims, and also our honesty and the commitment to see human beings being trafficked behind the statistics numbers. And that's, I think that is something that what was this panel is talking about. And of course, you know, architecture is our common cause. And that's why I think that we're having this panel, because we're united by the common cause. And I would like to start with actually talking about the inclusion of survivor voices, something that Ambassador Dyer has been speaking about, because this is indeed, in paraphrasing Gloria Steinem, she said that when unique voices are united by the common cause, they make history. And this, I think, is a paradigm shift in the work on the anti-trafficking field, where we're really committed and we recognize the commitment of the global community to include survivor voices in the policy making. One of the mechanisms that I think also consider a building block of the architecture, effective structure, is the ISTAC, the International Survivors of Trafficking Advisory Council, that ODIHR has the pleasure of working with since 2021. And also, of course, the launch of the updated ANORAM handbook with the contribution of the many speakers and the participants of this conference. And I would like to recognize Dr. Roth and Val Ritchie, who were part of the advisory board as this handbook was devised and updated. And I also like to, as moving to the other building blocks of the architecture and the ANORAM handbook and the recommendations, I would like to say that now what we see is that trafficking in human beings bears a woman's face. And it cannot be mentioned, it cannot be mentioned enough that awareness of that is of critical importance to solidify the fight against trafficking in human beings, because trafficking is the worst form of gender-based violence, and it is perpetuated by gender norms, sexist behavior, and we see it on a daily basis. No one is immune, and it's everywhere around us, especially that we see how disproportionately women and girls are affected by the trafficking of human beings. We know that they constitute 2/3 of all human beings trafficked. They are the victims. 2/3 are women and girls. And this is why I'd like to also mention, as we talk about the architecture, CEDAW, and particular recommendation 38, which calls for the adoption of a gender transformative approach to dismantle structural and systemic conditions which deprive women and girls of their fundamental rights. It is reflected in the National Referral Mechanism Handbook as a good practice, and it is a fundamental recommendation to follow. It's only by changing these underlying systemic issues we can eradicate demand for sexual exploitation and break prevalent cycles of trafficking in human beings. And we live in the 21st century, and already in these 23 years of the 21st century, we've seen and experienced many crises. Maybe more than we want to see. Just to name a few, pandemic of the COVID-19 that created new challenges and new mechanisms of trafficking, namely online. The Russian Federation military attack in Ukraine, the earthquakes, the climate change that are also prompting traffickers to adapt to these environments and continue the exploitations of human beings. And this existing vulnerabilities of women and girls increased even further, proving that violence against women and girls is part of a continuum rooted in the perpetration of male-dominant sexual coercion and control. And here I'd like to particularly stress this trend of online human trafficking and grooming, where the new trends particularly emerged during the COVID-19 pandemic, such as the expansion of the online exploitation in particular, with people shifting their activities to the internet, and so did the criminals and traffickers. And ODIHR has assisted in addressing this issue in the OSCE by supporting OSCE participating states in capacity building through training and provision of legal opinions and support in the development of national strategies. And this is part of the National Referral Mechanism Handbook in particular. Migration is another very important issue that negatively affects, well, the statistics, the number of people being trafficked. Andrea, I think that there is. So.
I recognize the delegates of the Russian Federation. Sir, is there a point of order?
Yes. Спасибо большое за... Я хотел бы поднять по порядку ведения. Уважаемая госпожа первый заместитель директора упомянула неприемлемые здесь термины в отношении моей страны. Никто не уполномачивал ее, как представителя БДИВЧ, этим заниматься, и мы здесь рассматриваем совершенно другие вопросы. Поэтому я попросил бы воздерживаться впоследствии от такого рода терминологии, в том числе и в контексте нашей тематики. Спасибо за внимание. Если что-то подобное будет повторяться, я буду каждый раз поднимать point of order. Спасибо за внимание.
I thank the delegates of the Russian Federation. I'll give back the floor to Ms. Kateryna Ryabiko. Thank you.
Thank you for your point of order. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'll continue. So migration and the need to escape violence may also put women at greater risk of being trafficked. And racism and discrimination are the two factors also that drive trafficking in human beings. And I would like to highlight in particular the upcoming joint guidance between ODIHR and OSCE to address trafficking of persons belonging to national minorities. And that's something that I would like to encourage everyone to look at, as there is another aspect and a very important topic that will hopefully contribute and become another building block of a solid architecture in the anti-trafficking work. Well, Ukraine has been targeted by trafficking networks already prior to the armed conflict, and with the flow of millions of refugees, in particular women and children from Ukraine, they have been exposed in the past months to becoming more vulnerable to human trafficking. And if we want to prevent trafficking of women and children, including women and children from Ukraine, we need to step up our efforts to eradicate the demand in destination countries. As destination countries are becoming a key in the debate on how to also part of the NRM handbook and the approaches that can be adopted to prevent human trafficking. And this, of course, involves measures at the policy level. It involves the legislative practical levels as well, and the engagement of the civil society and the broader spectrum of actors in the debate. And as ODIHR has been working with the different actors and the stakeholders, a number of recommendations and a number of good practices have become evident. One of these good practices is the prevention responses. They need to be trauma informed. And this cannot be said enough, as this is something that we are learning by doing, specifically when working with victims of trafficking and the survivors of trafficking, how important it is to promote trauma-informed approaches in this work. All responses also need to be tailored to address the specific vulnerabilities of women, children, Roma and Sinti, as well as persons with disabilities and the elderly. Information on rights and support needs to be available, especially safe accommodation and employment or childcare for refugees that need to be easily accessible, as well as hotlines that I think Ambassador Dyer mentioned as the good example and a good practice in the United States, that need to be functioning 24 hours a day and need to be available in local languages. And of course, traffickers are targeting humans online. They're targeting refugees online. And the responses need to incorporate social media platforms, because this is the 21st century. And many of the, especially young people, go online. They live online. And that need to be, this cannot be underestimated. Coordination. It was already said by the previous speakers how important it is, and there are effective mechanisms of coordination of the response efforts, but also learning from each other and learning from this coordination is of critical importance. I would like to also echo a little bit the previous speaker and address the victims of human trafficking, specifically children victims of human trafficking. And it also means that the main targets, because overall what we have is that the 30%, 33% of victims of human trafficking are children globally. And this also means that they actually present one of the main targets for traffickers. And if we talk about Ukraine, this constitutes the majority of the Ukrainian refugees, those who are at risk of being trafficked. And this risk is increasing exponentially when the responses are not in place. ODIHR has done a number of various activities, including working and providing capacity building to civil society, conducting a survey on safety and security of Ukrainian refugee women, and a number of rapid assessments to the transition countries, and a number of recommendations that can be applied across the OSCE region made evident that the development and the implementation of the national referral mechanisms, including NRMs for children, is an urgent need across the OSCE region. And it's really need to be ensured that this is part of the robust and effective response to the challenge of trafficking of all human beings. Registration systems, in particular, registration systems tracking children, especially unaccompanied minors, from origin through transit and to destination countries is of critical importance. And that has been overlooked and this needs to be prioritized in the response efforts. Well, children, of course, need to be provided, they should be provided with the child-friendly information, including online and through specialized children's hotlines. And again, trauma-informed methods of working with children, with minors, is of critical importance. Here, I would like to say that NRMs are essential to prevent and combat the trafficking of individuals, and especially women and children, and effective NRMs need to be bolstered in order for victims to be identified and protected. And this mechanism should be gender sensitive, trauma informed, survivor and victim centered, and all actions related to children should accord to their best interest. This constitutes the good practice that I can only encourage to be implemented across the OSCE region. OSCE is part of the global community. I think that we cannot argue that. And as part of the global community, we carry the responsibility to make the invisible visible. And this would enable us to solidify our architecture in fighting the trafficking of human beings and create the opportunities to speak for the survivors of trafficking. And here I'd like to say a few words about ESTAC in particular, because ESTAC has given a platform to survival leaders to participate in the creation of policies, to be integrated in the community, and not only to share their stories, but also to provide ideas, because who else knows best of how to address the problems, as they have experienced this crime. They have the living experience of this crime. And that's why survivors are integral to actively finding the solutions to the problem of human trafficking. And we continue to be committed as the institution of the OSCE to continue working with the survivor leaders. And we are also very proud and promote at every possible venue to ensure that such survivors councils are multiplied. And there is a good news that actually ICAT included the voices of survivors in their annual work plan. This is another good practice that is being multiplied and need to be looked at. And in particular, I really hope, and it was already mentioned, that there are different task forces and councils that are created at the local level. And this is of particular importance that similar initiatives are created at the national level, because everything needs to go from global to local to multiply the inclusion of survivors and also assurance that they contribute to the meaningful policies in addressing this crime. And we look forward to the very shortly launching the guidance of trauma-informed national referral mechanisms and responses to human trafficking, as well as guidance on development of survivors advisory council on a national level. So please look out for this work this year. And I also would like to mention that we also hope that the capacity building and the e-learning course that we launched yesterday will be a support for survivors of trafficking, together with the code of practice for ensuring the rights of victims and survivors of human trafficking that was developed by the ESTAC, the first cohort of ESTAC, where the survivors were in the driver's seat, will serve as such a mechanism to solidify our architecture and the robust response of the OSCE participating states to human trafficking. And finally, I would like to add with a thank you to participating states like the United States, UK, and Austria for their support to the update on the NRM handbook, and also to the US and Sweden for their support of the work of ESTAC. And we are looking forward to continue our cooperation. And I would like to bring this session home, if you allow me, Andrea, back to Dr. Roth, who said in the beginning about the importance of the message of hope. And I would like to add to that message that we need to continue sending a message of hope, and we need to combine it with the call for strong action to be ahead of the curve to end this crime. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you to all panelists for combining hope with practical solution. What we have tried to do in panel 2 was really to put forward key building blocks, as we call them in our concept note, of the anti-trafficking architecture for you all, for all participating states to consider. I'll move now to the floor requests. There is a fairly long list, so I ask you to the extent that's possible, stick to the time that was agreed. The first speaker on my list is the Deputy Minister of Labor and Social Affairs of Armenia. I pass the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished participants, first of all, allow me to start by expressing our sincere appreciation to the OSCE Office of Special Representative and Coordinator for Combating Trafficking in Human Beings for the excellent organization of the 23rd Conference of the Alliance Against Trafficking in Persons. Colleagues, violent conflicts and growing mistrust have inflicted serious damage to international cooperation and concerted efforts in combating various crimes, including the fight against human trafficking. And in addition, while recognizing the benefits of modern technologies, their misuse further exacerbates the situation, expanding the range of threats and challenges associated with human trafficking. The fight against human trafficking has been and remains the focus of the government of Armenia, and Armenia undertakes consistent, systematic steps to develop effective anti-trafficking policy, including through regular updates and reality checks. And its 7th triennial national program, which was adopted earlier this year. The government of Armenia prioritizes the implementation of most effective preventive measures. And since 2020, the priorities of the government have significantly expanded to include the creation of support mechanisms providing mental and psychical assistance to population affected by the use of force against the people of Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020, and from then on by the subsequent acts of aggression against the Republic of Armenia. Support is provided to particularly vulnerable groups such as children, women, people with disabilities, forcibly displaced population, making the fight against human trafficking, exploitation more inclusive and comprehensive. Within the framework of the adopted national policy, Armenia undertakes the responsibility to act properly to prevent, investigate, and punish. Let me also draw attention of colleagues to another important aspect of human trafficking that continues to remain overlooked, that is related to nexus between trafficking of human beings and enforced disappearances, especially during armed conflicts and in relation to prisoners of war in particular, which against the backdrop of recent events in our region is of particular relevance and urgency for my country. Armenia also cooperates with UN, OSCE, and Council of Europe, in particular with the group of experts of FRETA, to establish the most relevant acknowledgement of improvements in the legislative and policy framework. Dear Chair and distinguished participants, let me conclude by stressing once again the importance of international cooperation and collective efforts in combating human trafficking and exploitation. Armenia stands ready for further contribution to the global fight against the crime of human trafficking. I thank you.
And I thank you, Deputy Minister. Leadership is very often about listening, and for deputy ministers to travel a long way, not to be on a panel, but to listen to a conference, I think is something that needs to be recognized. So thank you, and thank you to other deputy ministers who traveled a long way, including from Kyrgyzstan, I recognize. Speaking of high-level leaders who traveled a long way to be with us, I see the delegation of Canada. Madam, you have the floor.
Merci. Excellences, distinguished invités, chers collègues, nous aimerions remercier les panélistes pour leur intéressante présentation. Nous savons toutes et tous que la traite des personnes est un crime complexe qui s'adapte continuellement à de nouveaux environnements où les trafiquants utilisent des nouveaux outils, méthodes et stratégies pour exploiter les individus afin de maximiser leurs gains financiers. Pour lutter efficacement contre ce crime, il est essentiel de mettre en place une stratégie globale, coordonnée et multidimensionnelle qui accorde la priorité à un leadership fort et à des partenariats efficaces. Dans le cadre de la stratégie nationale de lutte contre la traite des personnes du Canada, le leadership et les partenariats ont favorisé l'action collective entre les gouvernements, les provinces et les territoires, ainsi qu'entre les victimes et les personnes survivantes, leurs familles, leurs amis et leurs communautés à travers le Canada. Ces partenariats ont joué un rôle essentiel dans la réponse du Canada à ce crime. Mr. Chair, this is why between 2019 and 2021, the Government of Canada appointed a special advisor to combat human trafficking to engage with stakeholders, advise and make recommendations to the Government of Canada on federal anti-human trafficking policies and initiatives. Until a new advisor is appointed, efforts to combat human trafficking continue to be informed by stakeholders inside and outside of Canada. As part of Canada's national strategy, a governance structure allows for strong strategic direction and oversight. For example, the Human Trafficking Task Force brings together almost 20 federal departments and agencies to coordinate efforts. Some efforts include a national public awareness campaign, trauma-informed and culturally relevant services for victims and at-risk populations, training tools to help key sectors detect and respond to suspected cases of human trafficking, and survivor-centric guidelines for frontline workers so they can better help victims. As well, Federal, Provincial, Territorial Trafficking in Persons Working Group facilitates collaboration with all 10 provinces and 3 territories to share best practices and lessons learned. Recently, the working group established 3 priorities to advance: community-based supports for victims and survivors, the use of technology, and data collection coordination across the country. Canada remains committed to work collaboratively to ensure a robust and comprehensive structure that can address the root causes of human trafficking, help protect at-risk individuals, empower survivors, bring perpetrators to justice, and safeguard our communities. Thank you. Merci.
Merci à vous. The next speaker on my list is the distinguished ambassador of Malta. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Andrea. At the outset, I align myself with the statement that will be delivered later by the European Union, but I would like to make some remarks in my national capacity. Allow me to start by expressing thanks to the Office of the Special Representative for organizing this very significant meeting and to the panelists for their very insightful presentations. And as this will be his last Alliance meeting, I cannot not express sincere words of thanks and gratitude to you, Val, for your continued cooperation and leadership. And I wish you all the very best in your future endeavors. This year's theme rightly states that national leadership is crucial to end this heinous crime and that every member of society has a role to play in it. As several speakers highlighted in their interventions, combating trafficking in human beings requires a robust framework based on multiple pillars such as investments, partnerships, and capacity building. In this regard, in order to enhance national endeavors, Malta is currently working together with the Council of Europe and the European Union to set up a new national anti-trafficking strategy, which will be based on the already existing action plan. Since the launch of the project in December 22, several initiatives have been undertaken, including capacity building sessions on victim identification and investigation, as well as on preventing and combating trafficking for the purpose of labor exploitation. And we do thank the participation of your office and your assistance in this regard. Furthermore, an anti-trafficking interministerial committee was set up in October 2022, and it is dynamically steered by a national coordinator who is also with us today. This committee brings together all sectoral ministries to ensure the development of comprehensive policies as well as enhance coordination and information sharing among all sectors. As we have heard during this meeting, no country can win this battle on its own. Cross-border cooperation, sharing of best practices, and open dialogue are essential parts in this fight. Last October, Malta hosted the Council of Europe regional simulation on the referral victims in the Southern Mediterranean, entitled Human Trafficking Migration Routes, which brought together more than 100 participants from different countries. And as outlined by several panelists again today, combating trafficking requires a whole-of-society approach. To this end, the government has launched an awareness-raising campaign to inform the public on what constitutes the crime of human trafficking, while flagging its associated warning signs and indicators, and this took on board several of the OSCE recommendations we had received. Aside from a dedicated website, this campaign is using billboards across the country, QR codes on bus shelters, social media posts, as well as discussions on national television and radio stations, which aim to encourage the public to take a more assertive role in reporting suspicious activity seemingly related to human trafficking. And we are pleased to know that this campaign is working because we have already had a number of victims coming forward. So in conclusion, we stand resolute in our endeavors and will strive to continue together with all pertinent stakeholders at the local, regional, and international level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. The next speaker on my list is Sweden, also on behalf of the European Union.
Thank you, Chair. With your permission, I will pass the floor to the delegation of the European Union.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and good afternoon to everyone. I would like to thank all the panelists for their extremely informative presentations. And for you, Andrea, I would like to also thank the survivors who shared the very moving stories and testimonies this morning. The European Union Anti-Trafficking Directive highlights the need to cooperate between member states. The law enforcement authorities of EU member states should continue to cooperate, notably through close cross-border cooperation, including the sharing of information and sharing of best practices, as well as continued open dialogue between the law enforcement, judicial, financial authorities of member states. Additionally, coordination of investigations and prosecutors of cases of trafficking in human beings should be facilitated by enhanced cooperation with Europol and Eurojust. Member states are also encouraged to work closely with civil society organizations, in particular in policymaking initiatives, information and awareness-raising campaigns, research and education programs, and in training, as well as in monitoring and evaluation of the impact of anti-trafficking measures. In accordance with the Anti-Trafficking Directive, EU member states have taken measures to establish appropriate mechanisms aimed at the early identification, assistance to, and support for victims, so-called referral mechanisms. The proposal for an amendment of the EU Anti-Trafficking Directive presented by the Commission in December 2022, currently under negotiation, includes a provision that would formalize the establishment of a national referral mechanism in all EU member states. Since 2021, 6 meetings of the EU network of national rapporteurs and equivalent mechanisms have taken place, as well as 4 meetings of the EU civil society platform against trafficking in human beings. These included both ordinary meetings co-chaired by the EU Anti-Trafficking Coordinator and the presidency of the European Council, and extraordinary meetings called by the EU Anti-Trafficking Coordinator in the context of the EU response to the risks of those who fled the war in Ukraine. Furthermore, EU member states are supported by the 10 EU agencies who signed the joint statement of commitment to work together against trafficking in human beings in 2018. As combating trafficking in human beings needs the engagement of all, the EU works closely with partners to maximize the impact of its action on the ground. The EU Anti-Trafficking Coordinator ensures coordination and coherence amongst EU institutions, EU agencies, member states, and international actors in the implementation of the EU strategy. Joining forces in the fight against trafficking in human beings is essential for ensuring European security, protecting vulnerable people and the economy, and for safeguarding the rule of law and fundamental rights. The Common Anti-Trafficking Plan and the Solidarity Platform Ukraine is a concrete example of the EU comprehensive and multi-stakeholder approach. This plan, set up by the Commission immediately after the activation of a temporary protective mechanism, has played a crucial role in ensuring a coordinated response. The plan covers all aspects related to risk of trafficking in human beings: awareness raising, the setting up of hotlines, prevention, law enforcement, and judicial response, support to and assistance to victims, and cooperation with Ukraine and the Republic of Moldova. And in closing, I just would like to express EU support for the work of ODIHR in anti-trafficking. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ambassador. The next speaker on my list is a representative of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Azerbaijan, Mr. Samir Garayev. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for giving floor. Hello, everybody. I am Samir Garayev, Police Colonel, Head of Division in the main department on combating against human trafficking in the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Azerbaijan Republic. I very appreciate to take part here, and I would like first to thank the organizer of this important meeting, and let me to share Azerbaijan Republic experience with you in discuss activity. Azerbaijan Republic ratified the Convention, United Nations Convention on Combating Against Transnational Organized Crime in 2003. From that time, Vice President of Azerbaijan Republic approved for National Action Plan on Combating Against Human Trafficking. Now we are implementing fourth National Action Plan, which covers 2020-2024 years, and 39 state bodies are the executors of this National Action Plan, and they have annual report to the Cabinet of Ministers of Azerbaijan Republic. In 2005, in Azerbaijan adopted the law on combating against human trafficking. On basis of this law, established the institution National Coordinator on combating against human trafficking. Now, the first deputy chief of the Ministry of Internal Affairs is a national coordinator on combating against human trafficking, and his duty to ensure the coordination between the state bodies and relation with non-governmental organizations and international organizations. And he reports to the Parliament, National Assembly of Azerbaijan Republic, to the President of Azerbaijan Republic, and to the National Commissioner of Human Rights every year, and they evaluate the activity in this direction. On basis of rules adopted by the Cabinet of Ministers from 2009, approves the rules for national referral mechanism on combating on victims human trafficking. On basis of these rules, establishes an interagency commission under the national coordinator. Deputy chiefs of the states bodies are the members of this interagency commission. Same time, the NGOs are the members of this interagency commission. By the way, I would like to notice that in Azerbaijan, there is a coalition NGOs on combating against human trafficking. They number 45. And between the Ministry of Internal Affairs and a coalition of NGOs approves a memorandum in collaboration on combating against human trafficking. Legislation allows us to invite an international organization to the meeting of the Interagency Commission. For example, for the next meeting, we have planned to invite the Azerbaijan Office of International Organization for Migration, because we have a great relationship in this activity. On basis of above mentioned rules, establishes a work task force on combating against human trafficking. The members of this task force are the employers appointed from every state bodies, and between them there's a direct daily connection, and it helps us to solve the issues, problems during a little time, operatively and prompt. I can talk a lot about Azerbaijan experience in this direct, but taking into account, I would take into account I have a little time. I want to finish my speech. In closing, I would like to make a short remark regarding the statement of Armenia, and state that this country, Armenia, should stop advancing its claims on Azerbaijan's sovereignty and territorial integrity, including the referring to localities within Azerbaijan under various imaginary names. Furthermore, in the fall of 2020, in response to another military provocation by Armenia, Azerbaijan resorted to its right to self-defense in line with Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. As a result of 44 days patriotic war in 2020, Azerbaijan liberates its territories from the Armenian occupation and put an end of the conflict. Thank you for giving floor. I wish success in the work of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And before giving the floor to the next speaker, I'll plead participants to focus particularly on the issue at hand, human trafficking. We don't get to use this room very often to talk about this crucial issue. Yesterday, one of the keynote speakers defined it as the key human rights issue of our time. I plead to all participants to use the very few hours we have today to discuss this key issue. The next speaker on my list is the Holy See. Monsignor, I pass the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Moderator, the Holy See follows with what happens to thousands of trafficked and exploited people with concern. Globally, the Catholic Church assists and protects victims, working closely with local partners to prevent the scourge against humanity. As Pope Francis has pointed out, human trafficking finds fertile ground in the approach of neoliberal capitalism, in the deregulation of markets aimed at maximizing profits without ethical limits, without social limits, without environmental limits. Therefore, while we know that we are living in a difficult time, it is precisely in this reality that all of us are called to join forces to build networks of good. In this regard, the Holy See continues to express its support for what was agreed during the Ministerial Council in Porto in 2002, namely, we recognize the intensified cooperation among relevant actors in countries of origin, transit, and destination plays a critical role in the return programs for victims of trafficking and facilitates their reintegration. Therefore, we encourage all organizations providing assistance to victims, including NGOs, to further develop such cooperation. One example of such cooperation is the Santa Marta Group, a global alliance of law enforcement leaders, bishops, and religious communities working in collaboration with civil society in the fight against trafficking in persons internationally. The goal of this group is to offer a joint working model geared directly toward fighting this crime in order to safeguard the dignity of all those that may become prey of criminal traffickers. This is just one example of how various Catholic-inspired initiatives are working with success to address this phenomenon in a timely manner and in synergetic cooperation. Among other Catholic organizations devoted to fighting human trafficking, I would like to mention the work done by Talita Kum, a network of religious nuns, as well as priests and young people that work at the global level to combat trafficking in persons through initiatives focused on prevention, protection, social reintegration, and rehabilitation of survivors. Through their various partnerships and advocacy efforts, they promote actions that address the cause that lie at the root of the phenomenon. Both aforementioned initiatives are carried out in partnership with the local institutions and NGOs pursuing the same goals. These experiences confirm the importance of partnerships as well as the need of cooperation at different levels, such as between national and international institutions and between civil society organizations and the business sector. This model serves as a way forward in the development of effective strategies and well-designed programs to eradicate this abhorrent plague and a form of modern slavery. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Monsignor. And the language you've just used, the network of good, I cannot promise I will not steal it for some of the next speeches we will be giving. Is such a beautiful and powerful image. The next speaker on my list is from the Prosecutor General's Office of the Russian Federation. Sir, the floor is yours.
Благодарю за предоставленное слово. Уважаемые участники конференции, в Российской Федерации разделяют обеспокоенность проблемой торговли людьми как общемировым антисоциальным явлением. Проводимая в нашей стране государственная политика направлена на создание максимальных условий для преодоления этого негативного явления. При этом мы учитываем накопленный мировой опыт и межгосударственное взаимодействие. В России функционирует система мер по комплексному противодействию всем проявлениям торговли людьми. Мы боремся не только с незаконными действиями, но и условиями для них. Эту независимую работу между всеми государственными органами координирует прокуратура, в том числе с правом выдавать обязательные для исполнения требования. Прокуратура проводит проверки, направленные на устранение нарушений закона и прав человека. Мы добиваемся защиты прав мигрантов, в том числе вынужденно оказавшихся в стране. Для них предусмотрена финансовая, социальная, медицинская помощь, содействие в трудоустройстве, образование их детей, способствуем воссоединению семей. Мы боремся с нелегальным трудоустройством и невыплатой заработной платы. Все работодатели контролируются, даже если нет жалоб от людей. Пресекаются факты распространения электронных ресурсов, содержащих пропаганду проституции и порнографии с изображениями детей, а также информации о предоставлении незаконных услуг. На контроле находится оказание медицинских услуг и охрана здоровья граждан. Одним из значимых примеров борьбы с торговлей людьми стало уголовное преследование организованной группы лиц, которые под видом суррогатного материнства пытались вывести более 20 детей за рубеж. Главным принципом противодействия торговле людьми считаем недопустимость потребительского отношения к человеку. Ярким примером такого отношения является проблема абортов. Потребительское отношение к людям противоречит действующей в нашей стране государственной политике по сохранению и укреплению традиционных духовно-нравственных ценностей. Главное место в ней отведено гармоничному развитию личности. В системе профилактики правонарушений урегулировано предоставление помощи пострадавшим, а также лицам, которые могут быть подвергнуты риску. Им оказывается правовая, социальная, психологическая, медицинская и иные виды поддержки. Действует система бесплатной юридической помощи, правового информирования населения. Законодательно установлен механизм защиты прав потерпевших с полным комплексом гарантий. Предусмотрена возможность взыскания денежной компенсации причиненного морального вреда, в том числе по искам прокуроров в защиту потерпевших. Культура уголовного преследования предусматривает тесное взаимодействие следователей и прокуроров с потерпевшими для изучения особенностей их личности. Остаемся открытыми для обмена опытом, для совместных усилий по борьбе с торговлей людьми и условиями ее проявления, а также помощи пострадавшим. Благодарю за внимание. Полная версия выступления будет распространена позднее.
Thank you very much. As we move further into the list of speakers, I ask the interpreters if we can ask for just a few minutes of extra flexibility from their side, and delegates to the extent that's possible to stick to the 2 minutes assigned for floor intervention. The next speaker on my list is from the delegation of Switzerland. I cannot see. Madam, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator. Switzerland would like to thank the OSCE for organizing this conference dedicated to such a timely topic, and the panelists for sharing their valuable insights and experience. With different challenges unfolding in the OSCE region in recent years, such as the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russian aggression against Ukraine, it is now more important than ever to engage leadership in the support and protection of those facing the biggest vulnerabilities and those who see their human rights violated as victims and survivors of trafficking. Thanks to the country visit to Switzerland by the Special Representative and Coordinator for Combating Trafficking in Human Beings and his team in October 2022, we managed to raise awareness on trafficking and engage leadership at the national and subnational levels. We look forward to receiving the OSCE's valuable observations on how to further improve our efforts to prevent and combat trafficking in human beings. We also thank the OSCE for conducting 2 engaging workshops in Switzerland this year, which enhanced our awareness on the risks of trafficking in the digital space, as well as amidst the large movements of people fleeing the war in Ukraine. Last December, Switzerland adopted its 3rd National Action Plan to combat human trafficking, particularly focusing on the eradication of child labor and tackling labor exploitation. The new NAP also, for the first time, refers to trafficking in the digital space as a major challenge. With reference to what we heard this morning from Jane Lassander, we would like to underline that Switzerland, since 2018, is conducting sensitization campaigns among health personnel to raise awareness and thereby enhance the identification of and support for victims of trafficking. Switzerland remains committed to end this transnational crime and the human rights violations resulting from it. In this endeavor, we look forward to a continued collaboration with the OSCE and exchange of best practices with the stakeholders present today. I thank you.
And I thank you. The next speaker on my list is the representative of the United Kingdom. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Moderator, and thank you to the panelists for their insightful presentations. The UK does, of course, recognise the importance of national mechanisms to tackle the terrible crimes of modern slavery and human trafficking. We also recognise that this is a global challenge that demands a united global response. We've heard during the course of these 2 days that vulnerability to exploitation has dramatically increased over the last 5 years. The role of the COVID-19 pandemic, conflicts and humanitarian crises, and the adverse effects of climate change are clear. I also want to highlight that Russia's unprovoked assault on Ukraine is contributing to this increase. The UK and other OSCE participating states must therefore continue to work with a range of partners to ensure that victims are provided with the support they need to begin rebuilding their lives and that those responsible are prosecuted. We have a complex and wide-ranging set of structures to address this issue. This conference is indeed one of the most successful, demonstrating the importance of such global and national leadership to tackle this crime. But we also recognise that at the highest level, this issue has lost political momentum in recent years. This is understandable given the challenges governments have faced during the COVID pandemic. So whilst we do not wish to duplicate any existing structures, we believe there is room for a time-limited effort to inject new political momentum. This is why the UK is committed to supporting Theresa May in her work to establish a new global commission on modern slavery. Such a commission will inject political momentum at this critical time and will support the global community to achieve our shared goal of eradicating modern slavery and human trafficking by 2030. We echo the comments made by Theresa May yesterday and urge all those participating states here who have not already done so to evaluate how they can support this important new initiative. And finally, we would like to pay tribute to the Special Representative and thank you for your leadership and tireless work over the past 4 years. We wish you all the very best for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 5 extra minutes of translations and 4 more interventions from the floor from our partners in the among NGOs. So please try to stick to 1 minute intervention. The next speaker is from Step Up Stop Slavery from Cyprus. Kateryna, I don't see you in the room, but I hope you're close to a microphone.
Yes, hi. Okay, I'll be really, really quick. Thank you so much for this conference. It's really the really important topic we need to look at. I am a compliance and corporate governance specialist, and I'm passionate about compliance because it is the only way we can integrate and implement legislation effectively. So what we're looking at in developing a national strategy, in my view, is 3 essential pillars. Firstly, we have to have a solid architecture. Secondly, we need a solid strategy. And thirdly, there is essential key elements we need to incorporate within our strategies. When we look at architecture, every country, as we've seen, has a different methodology that they use. We need to make sure that we have the multidisciplinary approach. So in our committees that we're working with, we see that we're moving away from the criminal justice approach exclusively. We need to include all industries and sectors, including finance, business, FIUs, education, health, travel, and tourism. And what this makes available to us is information sharing, intelligence sharing, policy being co-created, having the ability to identify new trafficking trends and also develop expertise in every industry, which is something we are lacking. The second pillar is strategy. How do we create a national action plan? As a compliance specialist, when I go into an organization, I do 2 things. I start with a risk assessment, and then I mitigate the risks. So back to what we were saying yesterday, we need to start with mapping on the ground level, which is our research. And we've heard from the example of the Netherlands that research is built into their legislation, which is fantastic. We need to have a clear picture of the typologies, the methodologies, the business plans, the business models, the payment methods, which industries overlap in which types of human trafficking. Then for each risk, we mitigate them. And when we mitigate each risk, we have to look at prevention, protection, and prosecution layers. The third point that I want to highlight are the elements which we need to make sure are interwoven and built into our strategy. These are transparency, accountability, flexibility and adaptability, independent review, monitoring and evaluation, reporting, and most important, values. When we work with corporations, we look at values-driven, creating values-driven organizations. Here, we're looking at creating values-driven political strategy, which makes sure that we have at every level survivor-centered, trauma-informed approach consistently among all sectors. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kateryna. The next speaker on my list is from Eliberare. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and also for all the insightful interventions today. I think we were all inspired this morning by the intervention heard, and I think it is important to stress once again how essential it is to have an equal seat at the table for survivor voices and practitioners and to provide the adequate resources to support that. Yesterday, it was mentioned that we need to move beyond the 1% of victims identified. We actually need proactive identification and the specific tools and incentives for frontliners to be able to identify potential victims, as mentioned by the National Coordinator of Finland. I also want to echo what the Prime Minister May said yesterday, that legislation is one thing and it is important, but we need national budgets and adequate resources to be able to implement those reforms. But you talked today a lot about the national system, and I would like to put the light also on trafficking cases that happen in more than one country, when victims are often transferred from one assistance system, a mechanism in a country of destination, to another system in a country of origin. If the systems do not complement each other and the transition is not smooth, this person is at higher risk of being re-trafficked. And as a representative of a CSO from a country of origin, I would like to invite you all to reflect upon how do we ensure the proper standards in intervention in order to guarantee identification and holistic support and protection to presumed and identified victims of trafficking and minimize the risks of re-trafficking happening in multiple countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well done. The last 30 seconds before the lights go out and those who need translation will not hear me. I'm sorry for those who did not manage to take the floor under this session. We are constrained by our contracts with the interpreter, whom I thank. My last point is there is an impressive lineup of side events starting at 1. From 1 to 2, there are 2 side events. One organized by our office on what we call the social path, which is an innovative method of identification and protection of victims outside of the criminal justice framework. There is also another side event on the non-punishment principle, again, from 1 to 2. From 2 to 3, a side event on women leadership in advancing supply chain regulations and policies, and one on the innovative program of the navigators. Thank you, everybody. Lunch will be served right outside these doors. Allow me to thank again all the panelists, and thank you all for being here. Thank you.